Though maybe overlooked, Valley Forge was definitely a pivotal point in the American winning the Revolutionary War. They got stronger, learned how to suffer more, and really came together as a unit and realized they all wanted to win this war. Valley Forge definitely had a big impact on the Revolutionary War. Valley Forge is the location of the 1777 to 1778 winter encampment of the Continental Army led by General George Washington during the American Revolutionary War. The Continental Army, which is still largely made up of a collection of desperate colonial militias supported by hundreds of camp followers and allies, went into Valley Forge under the leadership of General George Washington. The British were occupying Philadelphia for the winter. The American army needed to keep an eye on them and prevent them from foraging the countryside for food they needed. Congress, after fleeing Philadelphia, were at York, Pennsylvania, west of Valley Forge. The troops being at Valley Forge between the British and York were protection for the Congress. The Valley Forge terrain was defensible. The grounds were suitable to guard against attack. While conditions were harsh, Washington tried to provide the comfort for his men. Problems like lack of supplies, clothing, and food meant the winter here was not a great one. On December 19th, 1777, 12,000 soldiers, 400 which were women and children, marched in the Valley Forge and began to build what became the fourth largest city in the colonies at that time, with 1,500 log huts and 2 miles of fortifications. Lasting 6 months, the campaign, which was from December till June, the people there were free and enslaved African American soldiers, civilians, indigenous people, wealthy officers, enlisted men, European immigrants, speakers of several languages, and people that studied multiple religions. Putting all the soldiers in one big camp allowed the army to protect the countryside and better be able to resist a British attack. But it became costly when lack of supplies and hunger infected the inhabitants, and diseases like influenza and typhoid spread through the camp. While there's never a battle at Valley Forge, the disease killed nearly 2,000 people during the encampment. The Americans couldn't do this by themselves. They needed some kind of help, some kind of motivation to help them go. Well, they called upon Frederick Full von name, Steuben. Baron Frederick was looking for a Wilhelm job. Augustus von Steuben was born on September 17th, 1730, in the town of Magdeburg in Prussia, but spent most of the first decade of his life in Russia with his father. When he turned 10, he went back to Germany for his schooling, and in 1747, when von Steuben was just 17, he enlisted in the Prussian army. And in 1756, when the Seven Years' War began, he was a second lieutenant in the army. After the war ended, he was discharged from the army. In 1775, von Steuben had many debts and wanted to pay them off by getting a job in the government. He looked for jobs in the British, French, and Austrian armies with no success. No other options, in 1777, he went to France when he heard there was money to be made in the American Revolution. He had a connection with the French Minister of War, so he asked him for a job, but the minister had him a job but could not promise him a salary. He could only volunteer in the Continental Army. Von Steuben was mad and he declined, but he looked and there was nowhere else to go, so he had to accept. When von Steuben met with Congress, he was promised he would be paid on the outcome of the whole Revolutionary War. In 1778, he headed over to George Washington and his soldiers in Valley Forge. He was appointed as a temporary inspector general. He needed to observe everything the soldiers did. He was very unimpressed by the soldiers. The first job for von Steuben was to create a standard method of drills for the entire army. He wrote the drills in French since he could not speak English, and had the military secretary translate the drills into English for him. He really motivated the troops and worked them directly, delivered the drills quickly and simply. The Americans loved him because of his willingness to personally work with them. In approximately 2 months, von Steuben completed a complete transformation of the army, with the army taking the basic drills from firearm control to line and marching formations. Von Steuben's ability to really drive the importance of the drills for men under his charge was a big reason the concept sunk in so quickly. He helped the soldiers a lot. Cold and starvation were not even the most dangerous threats at Valley Forge. Disease was the biggest killer. By the end of the 6 month encampment, roughly 2,000 men, which were 1 in 6 of the people there, died of disease. Camp records indicate that 2/3 of the deaths happened during the warmer months of March, April, and May, when soldiers were less confined to their cabins and food and other supplies were more abundant. As I said earlier, the most common illnesses were influenza and typhus, but there was also typhoid fever and dysentery. Conditions probably because of the poor hygiene and images of Valley Forge depict tremendous suffering from cold and starvation, as I've shown before, and I'm showing now. But while it was cold, the National Park Service says there wasn't anything out of the ordinary about the conditions at Valley Forge, saying that it was suffering as usual, as the typical Continental soldier went through during the Revolutionary War. A lack of organization, food, and money shortages plagued the Continental Army through the first half of the 7-year long war. These problems were really shown in Valley Forge. While the winter of 1777 to 78 wasn't exceptionally cold, many soldiers lacked proper clothing, which left them unfit to serve. Some were even shoeless. As Washington described in a December 23rd, 1777 letter to Henry Lawrence, we have, by a field's return to this day, made no less than 2,898 men now in camp unfit for duty because they are barefoot and otherwise naked. Army records suggest that each soldier received a daily ration of 1/2 pound of beef during January 1778, but food shortages during February left the men without meat for several days at a time. The answer is very clear. The Americans were helped by von Steuben and the harsh conditions at Valley Forge to overall become a better army. They practiced drills, saw starvation, bad weather, but they went through it and they clearly won the war.